So we're a couple days into 2019 and less than 8 weeks away from the Oscar nominations. So we're taking a minute now to review the best movies of 2018. Joining me are film critic Peter Canavese for the Weekly. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
And Tim Sika, you're the host-producer of Celluloid Dreams, movie reviewer for KGO,
right.
and former president of the San Francisco Film Critics Circle. So Tim, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in the paper this week, Peter, you pulled together your list of the top 10 movies. I'm kind of curious about that whole process because you guys have watched dozens and dozens of movies throughout the year. How do you even remember what happened in February? And is this an intimidating process or is this kind of fun?
Oh man, you want to take that first?
Yeah, well, it's always intimidating. It's always maddening for me because you want to get it right. You want to have the best representation of the best films of the year, and it's a lot of apples and oranges, right? So it's extremely subjective, and it ends up being a list of favorites really more than a. Some critics are very stringent about no, these are the best films of the year. There is no doubt. There's no question.
Objectively speaking,
right? Yeah, there's no debate. But for me, it's really more of a list of favorites, and the ones that just stuck with me the most. And I tend to be drawn to big themes, things that resonate with what's going on in the world, or just movies that are outside of the norm, that are distinctive.
Yeah. That sounds great.
You asked how we approach it. If it weren't for the fact that I take a lot of notes, but there's websites that actually list all the films released. So month by month and week by week. So I just go back to those and look.
That's a great reminder.
Right, and just because a lot of times you forget. Even going over those lists, you have to go over them 2, 3, 4 times. But and pretty much what Peter said. Although when I'm choosing a list, and I hate the whole process of doing that. It's top 10, right, which is an arbitrary amount. This year I did 20 because I really couldn't come to terms with the 10. But I'll pick favorites, but I also I'll look at something. For example, my number 1 movie this year was a film that was tough. It really made me work, and I kind of admired it more than it was a favorite, but I think over time it's going to become one of my favorites. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get to that, definitely. So when you're doing your culling, as it were, how do you approach the year in total? You said it had highs and lows, that had some distinctives. Would you say it was a good year last year? Was it better than other years, or is it about average? Or?
I think every year ends up being about
a pretty good year. And it's interesting. I was bitching about that. Around November, I thought, well, there's really nothing. There's nothing that stands out. But after you go back over the year and you analyze it and you look at everything, and I think it's because we see so much, we sort of lose perspective.
Yeah.
I thought it was an amazing year. I thought it was extremely diverse. I thought it was a great year for minority representation in films. A lot of the films were issue-oriented, current events, the Me Too movement.
Women were pretty strong.
Oh, yeah.
Leaders.
Yeah.
And I think every year there's only going to be 2 or 3 movies that are even worthy of being considered calling a masterpiece.
Okay.
I think that word gets thrown around a lot by critics looking to get attention, but perfect movies are hard to come by. So usually there's the top 2 or 3 movies on my list are kind of no-brainers for me because they really stood out as being of that kind of quality. But 4-star movies, I'm a pretty tough critic when it comes to that.
You are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of 2.5 stars.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's dive into the top 10 and start with number 10, just for the readers' viewers' information. We're going to kind of go with Peter's list, just as our framework.
Sure, yeah.
And but Tim,
good.
You have a couple others, surprises.
We're pretty close this year in our top 10.
Yeah,
although we have different
Barack Obama.
Oh, yeah, and Barack Obama's list.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Also not 10, it was more than 10.
Okay.
16.
Well, we start with politics as number 10 with Vice.
Right. Yeah. So for me, this is another kind of divisive movie, right? I think a lot of critics, it rubbed them the wrong way, and they're not big fans of Vice, but those who like it really respond to it strongly, which I did.
Yeah.
Adam McKay is the writer-director. It's an original screenplay. It's not based on a book, which most political films are. Yeah. And it's a really impressive original screenplay in terms of its research and also just its style. It's a very bold movie. He comes out of sketch comedy.
Oh, wow.
He was Will Ferrell's writer on Saturday Night Live. So developing all those wacky characters with him over the years, and then, of course, made Anchorman with him. So he takes that sketch comedy sensibility and applies it to a historical drama, which is kind of a crazy thing to do, which is why I think for some it rubs them the wrong way. But if you can roll with that, that's his view, that's his perspective. Yeah. It's a pretty amazing movie, I think.
And it's
Christian
interesting.
Bale is incredible.
He is, and it's interesting what Peter said too. Tonally, for me, it made this movie digestible because it was about a historical personage that I had a lot of issues with. At our voting meeting this year, the San Francisco Film Critics Circle meeting, someone was talking about the movie, and they were talking about Christian Bale's performance, and they said they were going to vote for him because Dick Cheney to this person was always inhuman, and Christian Bale made him human. Speaking back to the tone, I think the tone of the film was absolutely brilliant and made a subject that for a lot of people just they wouldn't even want to go near. But it was actually an amusing and funny movie that was historically accurate. They really did their homework. So
I'm glad you mentioned the accessibility, because sometimes there is a topic that people are like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that, but it's the performance.
Right. And that's actually one of the points he makes in the movie is that the American public is sort of, they're so put upon by their daily struggles and the bigger struggles that they want to just tone all that out and just watch something silly or ridiculous to distract them, to numb them.
Yeah.
So he's sort of playing into that by making this entertaining movie about here's what we should be paying attention to.
Right. Yeah. Great. Well, let's go to number 9. Number 9 is 8th Grade. I love that movie.
Yeah.
It just takes the awkwardness of that era and kind of shows you people triumphing in spite of it, which I think is, at least speaking for me, is kind of what it was all about back then.
I think one of the warmest movies of the year. It's kind of like a big hug of a movie because you just love this leading character, and there's such a strong rooting interest in this girl played by Elsie Fisher in a really strong breakout performance. She could get nominated for Best Actress. It's not inconceivable, even at her tender age. And then, it's another strong original screenplay by Bo Burnham, who comes out of stand-up comedy, but he's making his writing and directing debut here. So. An auspicious debut.
Amazing. So another comedian who's taking the reins of...
That's right.
And it was also unusual, too, in that it was from the story was from the standpoint of an eighth grade girl, which I don't think I've ever seen done in this way and from that perspective. And it was a beautiful film,
Yeah, I agree. Private Life?
Yeah, Private Life. Another one that just sort of stuck with me. I loved it when I saw it the first time, but sometimes those feelings sort of fade a little bit over time as you're working out your list. But Tamara Jenkins is another really strong voice as a writer-director. We have 3 in a row here, writer-directors. It's ostensibly about fertility and conceiving a child, this married couple trying to conceive a child, and that the rigorous trying process of doing that, but really it turns out to be about a marriage. And the 2 actors, Catherine Hahn and Paul Giamatti, are just fantastic.
Paul Giamatti's fantastic in everything.
Yeah, right. And I think he's been never better than he is here. And then it's also about what parenthood means, and not necessarily the most rigidly defined way.
Yeah,
beautifully written, truthful too, and funny and poignant.
Yeah, I think this topic, especially around here with the 2 career families and everyone having kids later, is bound to resonate.
Right.
I have to mention that that's on Netflix now, and I've noticed that Netflix kind of there's an overlap of the big movie theater
they're
access.
Starting to take over the world. I think.
That could be another show.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But some of these movies are available
Yes, that's true. I think the movie industry is very skeptical of Netflix. There's a lot of defensiveness over that, and you see it in film festivals too. A lot of film festivals won't program films from Netflix because they're trying to preserve the theatrical experience. But the reality, out here in the suburbs, is that Netflix is kind of where the audience is going.
Yeah.
Look at Bird Box, right? I mean,
Right.
It
45 million viewers.
comes onto Netflix, and suddenly the whole country is talking about it within hours.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because everyone's been able to see it because it's so convenient.
Right. Yeah, it's right there.
there. Yeah. Back to politics.
Yeah.
Number 7, Death of Stalin.
Yeah, this is one that came out pretty early in the year. It's from another writer-director, Armando Iannucci. He had some co-writers on this. And it's based on a graphic novel, of all things, a French graphic novel. But again, impeccably researched. It's very much truth-based. And as the title says, it's about the death of Stalin and the aftermath of that. And it's sort of like a comedy version of Julius Caesar, right? Because you've got all these backstabbers sharpening their knives and looking at each other like, can I trust anybody? And just really, really funny. I think probably the funniest movie of the year.
And again, another movie that stuck to the facts.
Yeah.
But the way this all, shook out was ridiculous and absurd. And when you're watching it, it could have made actually a very good, maybe serious movie too. And when I saw it, it reminded me of Dr. Strangelove, in that there was in 1964, there were 2 movies that came out about nuclear war. Dr. Strangelove was a comedy. Failsafe was the dead serious one.
Yeah.
Dr. Strangelove was the one that really caught on because it was so funny. And Death of Stalin is similarly insanely hysterical. It's definitely the funniest movie of the year, I think.
And I think Dr. Strangelove is Iannucci's North Star. I think that's
really?
probably his favorite film because he made In the Loop, which is another political satire that's very similar in tone. He's kind of chasing that tone, I think.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he created Veep on HBO as well.
All right. Yeah. Now I should mention that both of you, in your capacities, have interviewed directors and actors for some of these films.
Yeah.
I think you actually interviewed Iannucci yourself. So.
Yes. Peter has too. Yeah.
Okay.
We both have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually. Yeah.
It's great to get the insight from them directly.
Right, yeah.
Was there anything that stood out from you?
From those interviews?
I know that was like a long time ago. It was many, many months ago.
Yeah, it might just as well be many, many years.
Many films ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about the comedy of hysteria, is what I
Yeah.
remember him talking about. The kind of panicky
Yeah.
mode that they're all in, and how that amplified the humor.
Sure.
And the absurdity of the situation.
Can You Ever Forgive Me? This is interesting because I know you interviewed Marielle Heller.
Right. Yeah.
Director. It was a long time in making this movie. It sounds like that she hadn't.
Yeah,
optioned
and it's
in.
interesting too because during that discussion that we had, there was a Q&A that was it was on December 23rd. It was a paid screening at the Alameda Theater, and apparently it was like a homecoming for her and her brother. They live in Brooklyn, but apparently they're from the Alameda, so the place was packed. It was totally sold out, and she spoke to that, and she said even it was 10 years, I think, and even when they had made it, she was questioning herself, who's going to want to see this movie? It's about, a lesbian celebrity forger and her best friend who was a gay alcoholic, and it was basically a character piece where there was no action, there were no special effects, and she was kind of expressing how surprised she was that it seemed to be resonating. She was particularly concerned about the film resonating with Melissa McCarthy fans because it's her first serious role as an actress.
Yeah.
But and then I asked her, I said, well, how is it resonating with them? And she said apparently they love it, so yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like a triumph whenever your favorite actor, who's in the comedic vein, can take on something serious and be very credible.
Yeah, it's become a sort of rite of passage, I think, for comedic actors. At some point in their career, they always want to at least try it.
Sure.
It doesn't always pan out for them. But
Yeah, this one is from
Melissa?
Melissa.
In this case,
Oh,
definitely does,
she's wonderful. I mean, and she's still allowed to be funny. So,
Right,
but she's heartbreaking at times. Yeah, great performance.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right, great movie. First Reformed, Ethan Hawke.
Yeah, he's getting a lot of love from critics groups, and he could easily be one of the top 5 nominated actors at the Oscars. Yeah, he plays a pastor at the First Reformed Church in Snowbridge, New York, and it's the story of his crisis of faith. He's sort of triggered by one of his parishioners who's very concerned about climate change. He's a kind of a doomsayer, and that leads him to question his own choices in his life and how he's ended up where he is and where he's going and if there's any hope left when he's supposed to be up at the pulpit, giving people hope.
Right.
So it's a typical sort of Dark Night of the Soul movie for Paul Schrader, the writer-director. He's the guy who wrote Taxi Driver, created Travis Bickle, and
he specializes in dark stories.
In dark,
yeah.
dark nights.
And particularly like toxic masculinity is sort of his specialty. So yeah, another really interesting movie, and made in an interesting style
Right.
too.
Yeah.
A very sort of austere style, and also in the Academy ratio, the kind of boxy ratio as opposed to a widescreen ratio. So yeah, another memorable film that came out quite early in the year, but still is showing up on a lot of lists.
Yeah. And this is also available
Memorable.
on Netflix, I believe.
Yeah, and it's out on Blu-ray and DVD.
Yeah, they should be paying us for all these.
I know, we
references.
keep
Yeah,
mentioning
right?
them.
Yeah.
All right, now some movie that I really enjoyed, Roma, is your number 4. Woman-centered film,
Right.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting, of course, because the guy behind it is a guy. And he's also, again, the writer, the director, the editor, the cinematographer, the producer.
Oh my goodness.
He wore all the hats. So this is a major auteur movie, right? Like a one man's vision. And it's really typical for filmmakers when they reach a certain age to say, like, oh, I'm going to tell my story and my coming of age story. And they cast some kid to be them. And the focus is on that kid. He's the protagonist. And here he chose to do that, except he's not the main character. He's very much a supporting character. He's just kind of in the margins, and he decided to focus on the family's maid and nanny. So it's really her story, and the story of that neighborhood and his home country of Mexico at that time when he was growing up. So it's a cultural snapshot as well.
Yeah, and the Cleo is the leading character. So the actress was not...
non-professional, as they call it. This is her debut performance.
Yeah, I thought she was very stunning in kind of the subtlety, but you can tell that there's something going on.
Right, yeah, very believable and magnetic in a very quiet strength kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also noticed, so this is in black and white.
Right.
And the shots are just sort of that static shot where things happen in it, but it's not like, there's not a lot
There's some choice movement that he's applying.
some
There's a lot of long takes in the film too, where there's no cuts at all for maybe 8, 9, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the style is very different from kind of the MTV driven,
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of considered a master technician. He engineers a lot of kind of trick shots. Like there's a shot in this movie where the camera sort of floats out over the sea, and if you're not thinking about it, you might just be entranced by the story. But if you're thinking of it from a technical point of view, you're thinking, well, this is a kind of a showy thing to pull off, to have the camera kind of go from the shore and then out over the water without, any shaking.
And is the DP not drowning right now?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Walking on water.
Yeah.
So you can appreciate that from
Yes.
the technical standpoint.
Right.
Yeah. Number 3, we look at Vincent van Gogh
Yeah.
at Eternity's Gate.
Yeah. It's a film I'm hoping people will notice because it's not gotten a lot of attention.
Okay.
It's getting some for Willem Dafoe's performance. He's getting kind of a little awards push. But I think the film around him is also quite exceptional. It's from Julian Schnabel, who himself is a painter and a filmmaker he doesn't work a lot, but when he does, he makes these very artful, for lack of a better word, films. One of the things that's striking about the movie is the cinematography, the way that it evokes Van Gogh's work. But also it's a genius screenplay about genius, about the artistic temperament, about how people have a hard time knowing what to do with that. They treat him like he's a madman, and there are reasons to believe that he has. He has mental illness. He has problems. But on the other hand, his rationalizations start to sound pretty credible too when he's pressed about why he's behaved the way he has. So it leaves you to kind of question how he's questioned.
Yeah.
And the movie focuses on the last 2 years of his life, where his output was staggering. I think he painted something like 85 masterworks
Oh my goodness.
in the last 2 years of his life.
Yeah.
And I agree with Peter on this movie. I actually struggled with this actually being my number one movie because I thought it was the richest and the deepest and the most profound, personally, of all the films that I saw. And I thought it was note perfect in terms of its style and its writing and its acting. It's just a near perfect film.
So this is
Yeah.
your number one? Or
Well, no,
okay.
no. Well, I mean, it could be. Maybe
Okay.
if I did this a week later or something. I don't know. It was pretty close.
Okay.
But it was my personal favorite of
Yeah.
the year. Not my number one. It was my number two. But
Okay.
Yeah.
At Eternity's Gate. We
At
want people to see
Eternity's
that.
Gate,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Number two, though, for you, If Beale Street Could Talk, from the same person who did Moonlight.
Right. Barry Jenkins. He adapted the James Baldwin novel from, I think, 1974. So he wrote the screenplay and then he directed. And yeah, for me, I could say a lot of the same things about this film that Tim was just saying about At Eternity's Gate. I think it's basically a perfect film. Everything is perfectly in place.
Yeah.
The performances, the cinematography, the music.
And in any other year, it could be your number one movie, really, right?
Yeah. And it was the best film made in
Yeah.
2018 for reasons that will become clear in a moment. It's just a lush, even though it's about tragedy and difficult circumstances, it has a romantic quality to it. It's a sort of beautifully realized and exquisite movie in every respect. I have nothing bad to say about that.
Yeah, topics that are difficult too.
Right.
Racism.
Well, it's
social
amazing
justice,
that
right?
it's based on a book that was written in 1974, and it is all of it is now. The racism,
The injustice.
Yeah.
everything about it. And I
Criminal
found it,
justice system being
yes,
the main culprit, the villain.
right. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful movie. And I've described it as aching in
Yeah.
the good way.
In the right way.
Yeah, in the right way.
Deeply heartfelt. Yeah.
Deeply heartfelt. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, we've gotten to number one. Now we can explain what you were just saying.
Right.
This is a film that was made over
Yeah,
a period of time. It landed in 2018.
Right, yeah. So this has been, I've been tracking this for years because I'm a big fan of the filmmaker, Orson Welles. Technically, it's sort of like an Orson Welles film with an asterisk because he wasn't around to finish it. It had to be finished by, some of the people who finished it were friends of his or people who worked on the film.
33 years ago.
Yeah, 33 years ago is when Welles died, and he was working on it all the way up to his death. So 40 minutes of the film were edited by Welles himself and under his supervision. And then the other 2/3 of the movie had to be edited from all this extant footage that he left and from the screenplay that he left. There was a script there, and there were some notes that they could work from. But they've done a very creditable job of convincing me that this is a Welles picture. And
This is how he wanted The Other Side of the Wind to be.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. As much as you could hope for.
Yeah.
It's a wild ride. You have to be ready for it. Don't sit down to kind of casually watch this movie. Get yourself a cup of coffee and say, "I'm ready for an Orson Welles masterpiece."
Yeah.
There's that word. I'm going to use that word here.
And I remember when I saw it for the first time, I remember thinking it was so overwhelming in those ways that are the reason you love movies that I thought, you know what, I really need to see this at least 10 times before I even feel qualified enough to comment on it.
Yeah.
And that's why it was my number one movie too. I just think I'm going to go back to it repeatedly and rediscover it and find new things in it. I've already watched it 3 times, and I was telling Peter on the way up, every time I've watched it, it seemed like a completely different movie. I think it's a masterpiece.
So many
too.
layers.
And deeply personal for him.
Yeah, very
because it's about a
personal.
film director. And
Yeah.
played by a film director, John Huston, who's a great friend of Welles.
Yeah.
And there is, we should mention, a companion piece documentary that's also very good by Morgan Neville, the same guy who made Won't You Be My Neighbor,
Right.
which is a favorite doc of many people this year, that also gives you the amazing story of the making of the movie.
It's called They'll Love Me When I'm Dead.
Right.
Yes.
So when you go to watch the Wells film on Netflix, The Other Side of the Wind, it'll also
There's a
recommend you
companion.
Yeah, and it
watch.
works either way. You can watch it either before or after.
Okay. Yeah, one
Right.
informs the other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it's interesting because Other Side of the Wind is a film within a film
Right.
kind of scenario
Right.
too. So there's
Yeah.
just a lot. I'm glad you said, because you're a film critic, and you said that you need to watch it multiple times. And the people who watch it once and go like, I didn't get what was
Well, and
going
some
on.
people would say, well, why do I have to watch it multiple times? Why can't it just, a lot of people won't even stand for that, and they won't tolerate that because they go to be entertained. And
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
But it isn't for, no, absolutely, no.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're a film fan, oh man, it's like manna from heaven.
Now, you had some other films that were on your top 10 list.
Yeah, I was looking at mine, and we pretty much agreed. I think my positions were a little different. I think I had Vice at 3, but I think the only 2 movies that were in my top 10 that were not in Peter's were Wildlife, which was a domestic drama. It was written and directed, adapted. It was a Richard Ford novel, the only novel of his I had never heard of. It was written and adapted by actor Paul Dano.
Oh.
And it's basically takes place in 1960, and it's about the disintegration of a marriage as seen through the eyes of a 14-year-old boy. And again, Peter used the phrase earlier, it stayed with him. This movie just stayed with me. And I just thought it was amazing. And considering that it was the first directorial effort of this 34-year-old millennial actor, I thought it seemed much more mature than that. So I loved it, and I've seen it multiple times, and it gets better every time I see it. And the only other movie that was not on Peter's list was a film called The Rider, which was another drama. It was about it was a story of an up-and-coming rodeo star who's injured in an accident, and he's trying to sort of like work his way back into the rodeo system. What I loved about the film and how it was made is it was cast, we were talking about Roma earlier, non-professionals, but the script was written around incidents that happened to them in their real life. It was a fictional script, and the director had them, play these parts. It was, again, probably emotionally, it was the strongest film for me of the year. It was about, what it means to be a man, basically, in that world of the rodeo, where it's masculinity is very cut and dried. But it's a beautiful, beautiful film. And again, seen it multiple times, and it wipes me out every time I see it. So.
It seems like we're seeing a lot of great first efforts this year, whether directors or actors.
More stuff from women, too,
fresh
which is always great. Oh, wait a minute. Lean on Pete. So how Lean on Pete? You saw that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Now that was in one of your.
10,
No, it is in my top 10. It was my number 7. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so was The Rider. Yeah, also. And I liked Wildlife a lot too. It starts to be. Yeah, you could do it easily a top 20.
Yeah.
With
and again,
films.
and again, for me, I'm looking at this, and I sort of move towards the intense, emotional, character-driven drama. And Lean on Pete was a film like that too. It was again based on a novel, right?
Yeah.
And it's about this. It's really about the search for love. This 15-year-old boy who is working at a racetrack, and he befriends a horse that they're going to slaughter. So it's basically about the journey he goes on with this horse. And it was, again, aching.
Also, living without a safety net in America, which is unfortunately commonly the case more and more.
Which was sort of like the
resonating
unspoken
today,
resonance that the picture had. But, I mean, you could relate to it. But again, it stuck with me. And that was released, I think, in April of this year. And again, it's a film that's not really tracking on anybody's awards list, but was on mine.
Yeah, in some ways it's great to have these lists so that you can use your bullhorns
Right,
to bring people's attentions to some movies that are really worth seeing.
Yeah.
Well, there's much more from you in today's edition of the Weekly. You've got the worst movies of 2018. Always fun to read your commentary on that. Best documentaries, heroes, villains, and animated films as well, so people can pick up the paper or find us on Palo Alto Online.
Yeah, and then put it up on their fridge or pin it up to their bulletin board. And, yeah.
Well, I'm working through your top 10 list
Yeah,
myself,
right.
so. It's been great talking with both of you today. Thank you so much for being
thank
here.
you.
Yeah,
Really
it's a pleasure.
appreciate it. Peter Canavese, your website is Groucho Reviews, which is grouchoreviews.com.
Right.
And Tim Sika, you can be found at celluloiddreams.net, as well as on KGO.
On the KGO website too,
and
yeah.
other places.
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, yeah.
Thank you both for being here. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
That wraps up this edition of Behind the Headlines. You can find their stuff online, and you can find Palo Alto News on paloaltoonline.com, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next week.